Welcome to Metropolitan Community College and another powerful Black History Month virtual program. My name is Dr. Cynthia Gooch Grayson, the college's Associate Vice President for Equity and Inclusion. We are so very pleased to have you join us this evening. Black History Month is an annual celebration of achievements by African Americans and a time for recognizing the central role of Blacks in the United States history. Also known as African American History Month, the event grew out of Negro History Week, the brainchild of noted historian Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Since 1976, every United States president has officially designated the month of February as Black History Month. Help us to know how to continue to provide quality virtual programming by sharing your comments about tonight's event on the online evaluation at mccneb.edu/IEEVAL. It will also be made available in the chat. Metro will continue to offer diverse Black History Month programming through February 11th. All programs are free and open to the public and accessible from your home, office, or any location where you can view a phone or computer screen. Details can be found at mccneb.edu/Black History Month. As an addition to tonight's program, Minister Ananias Montague will perform inspiring music for your listening pleasure. Ananias Markey Montague was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. He has worked with Richard Smallwood, Ricky Dillard, Kim McFarland, Lyle Lovett, and many, many others. He has also toured Europe, spreading the gospel through song. Ananias is currently working on a dual bachelor's degree in business administration and biblical studies. He is the minister of music at Salem Baptist Church. His motto is, "Be authentic in everything you do." I present to you Minister of Music, Ananias Montague. Thank you so much, Minister Montague. Your continued contributions to the Omaha community and Metropolitan Community College help to ease the burden of the isolation we feel during this pandemic. Now, please welcome Ms. Kathy J. Trotter, the coordinator of Metro Single Parent Program, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Dr. Marcy Van Diver was proudly raised in Omaha, where she attended Picot Elementary, Beveridge Middle, and Marion High Schools. Currently, she is an assistant professor of education at Towson University in Baltimore County, Maryland. She received her BS in middle grades education from Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. After her graduate studies, she worked for Atlanta Public Schools as an alternative middle school teacher and received her M.Ed in educational policy and leadership from Georgia State University. She later received her PhD in curriculum and instruction, urban education from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Marcy's research interests explore various intersections of Black education, including resistant pedagogy, historical and contemporary issues in urban education, and transformative emancipatory learning. Dr. Marcy Van Diver.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the beautiful music, and thank you to Dr. Cynthia Gooch Grayson for the invitation to come. I wish I could be face-to-face. I do miss Omaha, but hopefully in the coming years I can come back. I do know some familiar faces before I share my screen and get started. I see familiar names. Thank you to everyone from Salem Baptist Church for coming, and of course to members of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Thank you for supporting me tonight. So I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. Let me go back. Okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about, I call it the education pandemic. There's multiple pandemics going on, as we know. So we're going to talk about some of the long-term implications of what we're dealing with in terms of COVID, the election, new federal leaders, and what that means for our children in schools, and our roles for some of you as parents, what we can do. So really quick, I don't need to go through this because Ms. Trotter read all of this, but I currently focus a lot of my research on just the experiences of Black students. And because of everything that was going on in the news with COVID, the election, civil unrest, the uprising, Black students once again are at the center of those who are often overlooked and underserved. And so we're going to talk about some of those implications today. This is my objective. We're going to go through education, talk about learning loss, which is a big concern for many parents. If some of you are parents on this call, or you watch nieces, nephews, brothers, and sisters, learning loss is a big thing that educators are looking at today. Then we're going to talk about some post-election possibilities now that we have a change in leadership, what that might mean for education. And then I'm going to leave you with some practical tips and advice. And just if you have a child at home, where you should be with that child in terms of milestones and standards. We're going to talk about some of that. So I hope it's both eye-opening, but also pragmatic at the end. So this is what I'm going to start with. This is kind of where we are in education. We have kids eating alone at lunch, and we have plastic dividers. If you could look at the bottom left screen, it's super sad, and face masks and shields. And then on the right-hand side, this is why I say it's multiple pandemics. We have the issue of voting and things that we've always taught kids that matter. Your voice matters. Civics and social studies matters. People in government are going to have your best interest at heart, make your voice heard. So kind of the tension of the election and people doubting the election results. And then at the bottom is actually a wonderful picture. It's a woman standing in kind of a plastic shield. She's in line to vote. You can't really see it, but behind, she's in line to vote with her child. She has an I can't breathe mask on, but it's both multiple pandemics kind of feuding at the same time, working in tandem and in many ways kind of competing for national attention. And at the center of this are kids who are at many times underserved. So we're going to talk about the pandemic of COVID, the pandemic of changes in leadership at the federal government, and then of course race. I give a nod to the bottom right picture. Race is a big, you can't separate race, socioeconomics, class from a lot of these discussions. And this is a written example of everything I just said. But a lot of the themes before I move on of health and safety, xenophobia, science, social studies, racial justice, civics, like I said, it's related to both COVID and the election. Like you can't talk about COVID-19 without talking about the importance of science. You can't talk about the election without talking about the importance of social studies and civics and kids knowing how to vote and where to vote, and their voice matters. So a lot of these themes, although they are competing, overlap in many, many ways. This is the one thing I want to guide our conversation. We don't have much time, but I just want us to know in this situation, so in this situation, I mean 2021, we don't simply want to frantically struggle to restore the status quo. Like we hear a lot of people say return to normal, but in education, we really shouldn't want to return to normal because the status quo operating at the effective level was not serving all of our students. So actually in COVID, in this change of federal leadership, we should think of some renewed possibilities for education. Yes, we want some things to return to look like some sort of normalcy, but we should think of new ways now that COVID has kind of expanded our outreach, new ways of educating students so that we do not leave students behind. So really quick, I'm going to start with the bad, and hopefully at the end of this presentation, we can think about some hope and we'll talk about some good, but we should pull over and talk a little bit about just where we are as a nation in relation to COVID. And it's sad, this is very daunting, but I think it's important for us as civic citizens to just know, like, how has this pandemic shaped education? So the Brookings Institute has already done a study on last year, 2020, right after the pandemic hit, did a nationwide study looking at how much kids have retained or failed to retain information in the key subjects of English language arts and math. Those are the two most testable subjects. So they did a nationwide study. And so in comparison to years past, once COVID hit, students all across the nation, all across grade levels, class, race, it doesn't matter. The pandemic hit everybody. In comparison to years past, students have only retained 70% of what they normally would have. So 70% of what they normally would have is what they retained in English language arts. And then math is a bit more daunting, only half of what they should know at the end of the school year did students retain. So we saw a disruption in spring 2020, fall 2020, spring 2021 is still very uncertain. I do know that Omaha Public Schools has kind of like this 3-2 plan I keep hearing about. We'll talk about that. But things are still very uncertain, even with the vaccine and hopes of things becoming a bit safer for kids and families. Things are still uncertain when students will be 100% back face-to-face. So the fact that each year, if we think about, so that this is after just 1 year. If we think again, what happens a second year of this, there is expected and measurable learning loss that a lot of our students have. We know the most vulnerable groups. This is kind of just a microcosm of society. We know you could take any social problem and it's worse for people who are super young, low income, students of color, immigrant students, and then students with special needs. And we're going to talk about some of the ways that we can mediate those problems and kind of pull over and look at how these groups have been impacted. So I mentioned learning loss. I mentioned the Brookings study a couple slides ago, 70% retention in English language arts and only 50% in math. But we know students of color, not because anything is cognitively wrong with Black children or brown children or immigrant children, not because of that. But we do know that many students of color do go to schools where they are underserved, they're in overpopulated classrooms, they get brand new teachers, they do not get the veteran teachers. So we know that there are some learning environments that inhibit many students of color from getting the same access. So it's issues of equity. Learning gaps for Black students. So take everything we just talked about with the Brookings study. Learning gaps for Black students have increased 15 to 20%. With the onset of school closures. And so if you take how far a child is going to be behind each year, Black students who remain disconnected from the learning experience, and that's a phenomenon that people are seeing. Teachers cannot get students to log on. There's internet access issues. Virtual learning is just not for everybody, so it's not as engaging. So for students who are disconnected from the learning experience, are expected to experience about 10 months of cognitive learning loss each year. And for low-income Black students, they're expected to be a whole grade level behind. And like I said, if you look at this, that's why I call it a pandemic. If you look at this, this is for 1 year. So if we look at this over 2 years, if we're in COVID, if we're in this crisis for another year, how daunting that will be for all students, but specifically for students of color and low-income students. The digital divide is a big thing that I feel like finally people are starting to talk about. And this is something Dr. Gooch Grayson and I talked about before we started this session. She talked about MCC's access with computers. I'm at a university in Maryland. There are computer access issues as well, but with the onset of COVID-19, more than 15 million school-age children did not have home devices, and 9 million did not have correct connectivity or internet access issues. This does not count and take into effect the students whose parents had to drive them to Subway or to McDonald's to use their Wi-Fi. These are students who just did not have access, period. We know that students of color are also more likely, so there's implications for this. Not only are you not learning because there's a lack of internet access, but some districts, and I would say unfairly so, are also counting absences towards truancy. So students who don't log on now have punitive or disciplinary infractions because of that. And there was a big thing that hit the news last year. A Michigan judge arrested a 15-year-old for truancy, which is a state law. Like, yes, skipping school and you're underage, yes, that is against the law in many states. But this judge used the loophole and arrested a 15-year-old for not logging on to their online class during COVID. So we see that's a very extreme example, but we do know that there are academic and behavioral implications when students just don't have access to school. And in many cases, just like a lot of things with education, students don't pay the electric bill or the internet bill. That is a parent issue, that's a social class issue, etc. So we now know that internet access, I think COVID has taught us one thing: internet access is a fundamental human right at this point. Like, you need the internet to be able to be successful in most things now. So that is another divide that we're watching. I'm going to go through these quickly, but also social emotional learning, which to me is probably the most important. And we'll talk about why I think this is the most important. We know that beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic, students learn conflict management, they make friends, they learn healthy adult student relationships with their teachers. After school activities like sports and clubs, those are just as important as, like I said, the reading, the writing, and the arithmetic. And so when students do not have access to that on a consistent basis, there are social emotional learning losses as well. We also should give a nod to students who live in homes where there is unequal access to food, unsafe home environments, abusive environments as well. And then just the opportunity to develop character, which is another thing that schools do, whether overtly or covertly. You learn things like honesty. Did you cheat on your test? Honesty, tolerance when you are with a classmate who says something you don't like, self-control, all of the things that character, all the ways to build character in a classroom. When you're remote, a lot of kids don't have the opportunity to develop those in the same way. So social skills is actually something that I am most interested in seeing the lapse as our kids continue to be more virtual. Last thing before we move on to kind of the hope of what we have to look forward to is that before COVID hit, this is another thing that we saw, is that there was a lapse in teacher training, and it's not teachers' fault. I hope by the end of this talk, you know that I'm advocating for teachers, because teachers were dumped with quite a big task with very little preparation. So really quick, a study showed that before COVID hit, they surveyed teachers, how many teachers had access to online instruction, meaning they were trained in delivering online instruction. 2/3 said yes, about 1/3 said no. But more importantly, percentage of teachers who found those trainings useful. This is before COVID hit. This is in 2019. You see kind of a mixed bag. So not all of those trainings were useful. And we know that teachers went from getting just one professional development in technology, where they were taught how to teach online, to now expected in the COVID environment, being expected to teach 100% virtually in some cases, especially right after the pandemic started. Many teachers were just thrown out and expected to swim and teach 100% online effectively. And that's not always the case for many teachers who are older, do not have technology savvy, or just simply just were not trained to teach 100% online, which is most of us. I'm a college professor. I was not trained to teach 100% online. So there was a learning curve for everybody. So that's another thing that compounded this pandemic and made it even more of a difficult situation. So for the next couple slides, we're going to talk about kind of what did COVID do, and then what are some post-election possibilities that we hope to see. And then after this, I'm going to share some just practical advice, tips, tidbits that you can hopefully use if you're a parent, or you have a young person in your life or a college age person in your life that you can help. So we're going to go through these a little bit. So early childhood education is receiving quite a bit of attention because of newly elected President Biden's focus on that. But in relation to COVID, one thing that researchers like myself are looking at is that early childhood students, so that means kindergarten through second grade, their entire perceptions of what schooling is different than what most of us know schooling to be. So if we stop and think, if you look in the orange box, younger kids, their entire grasp of what school is might have been behind a computer screen or wearing a mask, which is not normal. That's not what we, if we think back to kindergarten, ever had to experience. So their understanding of what school is just completely derailed. Also, what's very precious is that a lot of them are expected to be on computers and they can't even type. Like in kindergarten, you learn your alphabet, or if you might already know it, but you learn these things. Being expected to kind of be on a computer and have these computer skills, there's a big divide there with little kids in COVID. If you look in the purple, post-election possibilities, Biden, and especially because of his wife, he is expected to be someone that focuses on education. Early childhood was something that he campaigned, so we're going to look to see what happens with that. The plans for universal preschool has been something that he campaigned, and also it is listed on the White House website, so we do hope we see more about that. And in comparison to years past, so former President George W. Bush, even Barack Obama, mentioned this same focus, but they had different, buy-in from Congress. We do hope, this is the one kind of hope that COVID has brought, since COVID has impacted everybody, rich, poor, white, black, doesn't matter. We do expect more bipartisan support for these early childhood initiatives, because even congressmen, congresswomen who disagree with Biden up and down, they do know what it's like to have a 4-year-old at home, and they're dealing with the same kind of struggles. Of course, they're much richer because they're in Congress, but we're hoping bipartisan support is garnered because COVID has impacted everybody. So that is what we are looking for in that. Teacher education is another thing that we are kind of navigating multiple pandemics. I know this in orange, if you look in the orange box, I teach college students how to be teachers at my university. The last 3 semesters of students have not been face-to-face with kids during student teaching. And that's at my university. It's very similar to other universities on the East Coast. So what are the implications of that? There are several. Usually students in college, when they decide to be teachers, have to student teach. That means their last semester of college, they go into a classroom and they have their own kind of classroom, and they're kind of, they're like practice teaching for a whole semester. The last 3 semesters of students, including this one, did not have that opportunity at a lot of universities because everybody was virtual. And what that means is we're preparing this newest batch of teachers. They might be able to write a lesson plan and to tell you all the theories that they know. They might be able to do a great online activity, but they do not know what it's like to face-to-face teach a student by themselves. So there might be classroom management issues that they encounter, because telling a child to sit down over a computer screen is a lot different than telling a child to sit down in a face-to-face classroom. So they don't have the same practice as a lot of us had when we decided to be teachers. So that's something that's concerning. But if you look on the bright side, one thing that we are hopeful of is that President Biden has kind of toyed around with the idea of possibly forgiving student loans. Also on the website, he's still mentioning an increase in teacher pay or teacher equity. And this is also something that Kamala Harris has mentioned when she was campaigning, is that a raise in teacher pay is something that is of interest to her. It is proven through research that, of course, we know teachers don't go into the field because of money. We know that, that's a fact. But we do know that if you feel like you're being compensated for what you're worth, or if you are paid something that seems fair to you, you have higher job satisfaction and greater happiness on the job. So perhaps, although some of our new teachers will be a bit less experienced than we are hoping that if pay is levelized or subsidized or loans are forgiven for some teachers, that they will at least be a bit happier on the job. So that is a bit of a trade-off, but it's something that we're looking at. Higher education, I live and breathe this right now because I'm a professor, but we know a lot of students took gap years because of COVID. There was no need in paying $20,000 in tuition if you can't go to the football games and you can't pledge to the sorority you want. So a lot of students decided to sit home. And in fact, at my university, I think 25%, they saw a reduction of 25%, which is huge for a lack of tuition for incoming freshmen. So we see enrollment is down. It's expected to go up once more universities open, but that is something that has happened. COVID has also shifted desired majors. And this is kind of new research because we're just getting the first batch of students who are completed a full year of college in COVID, but we see an uptick in computer science, telecommunications, public health and nursing, and we see a lot less people declaring humanities and social sciences. So English or art, that kind of stuff, we see a lot less, and we see students who are doing more pandemic related fields. In purple, some hopes that we have are Biden does have a focus on community colleges. In fact, he champions to make them free. We saw even at my university, a lot of students decided in their gap year to either go to a community college or just work. So we are hoping that students see the value and the economic value and even the social value of pursuing community colleges first before coming to four-year universities. The one thing at the bottom, I do hope that if anyone on this call is works in higher education, you work in a university, that a focus on student affairs and student organizations will be pivotal once things start back to open, because many of these students spent their senior year of high school, junior year of high school, freshman year of college, depending on how long we're in this pandemic, without a lot of social interaction. So they, like I said, they want the football games, they want to join debate club, pledge sororities, join the Caribbean Student Union. They are craving social interaction in ways that I do hope universities, trio programs, et cetera, give nod to just social things, because that is something that a lot of college students have been craving. And then the last thing, the kind of dueling pandemics that we're looking at, we saw during COVID and during the last president's administration, we saw an uptick in xenophobia towards Asian Americans because of COVID and kind of just racist remarks made towards them. Also, we saw President Trump towards the end of his tenure was very critical of the 1619 Project, which was a history curriculum designed to talk very in depth about slavery. He was critical of that, and also banned critical race and diversity trainings at the federal government level, which a lot of people felt like was counterintuitive because our nation is diversifying. That is fact. That's not even a partisan fact. That is fact. Our nation is diversifying. So to dismiss the exploration of race was something that was very, very kind of backwards for a lot of people. So that's something that COVID has brought, former administrations have brought, but we did see that the day after President Biden was elected, that he reversed the banning of critical race perspectives. So at the federal government level, and this impacts state colleges as well, like, yes, talking about race in faculty trainings or professional trainings is something that is important. So we'll see that come back. And then he does embrace the 1619 Project, which, like I said, just looks at history and really, really unpacks the importance of slavery's mark on American history. So we will see, maybe, especially if we consider the civil unrest that we saw on January 6th and just the overt divide in the nation. Hopefully we will be able to see what exploring these racial divides mean, or looking at human difference in a critical way. And maybe that will be healing and cathartic for some people. Okay. Oh, I thought that was the last one. Last one, really quick. Changes in educational curricula is something that we've also been noticing, and we're going to continue to watch. One thing that COVID has definitely ushered in is that we know for a fact that I mentioned this already, that access to fast internet is a human necessity. We are seeing a decline in four-year college interests at the moment. Like I said, probably because student organizations are not thriving like they are face-to-face. And then we saw, like I said, pre-COVID, and this is kind of even before the pandemic, there was such a focus on math and science. But if you look in the purple box, we have an optimistic focus on science and civics. There was a wonderful meme on social media that said basically, for so long, math and English were the two subjects that everybody wanted to test. Those were the things that you took the SAT, it was in math and English. You had to get math and verbal. But the pandemic and the civil unrest that we've been seeing shows us that science, the pandemic, and civics, the unrest that we're seeing in government, are just as important. So hopefully there will be a renewed focus on those two subjects as well. And now that we have an educator in the White House, the new First Lady, hopefully there will be kind of a more thorough focus on education and the importance of education. Okay, so all of that was daunting. What's the hope, Marcy? Well, thank you for asking. We have a new Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona. He is from Puerto Rico. He spent a lot of his years in education, kind of from the ground up as a teacher, principal, assistant superintendent. He also was like a commissioner for the state. I think he was in Connecticut, for the state of Connecticut. And he also spent time as an adjunct professor, training teacher. So that is also a fact that we have someone with more educational experience as the Secretary of Education in comparison to Betsy DeVos, who across party lines was not really liked for her lack of expertise in education. And then there's some accidental benefits that COVID has brought. And I think it's important to kind of think about, none of us wanted this. It's been also very harmful, and there's a death toll, and some of us on this call might be impacted in a very personal way by COVID. There are some accidental benefits of remote learning that we didn't ask for, but educators are maybe hoping we can lean into. We learned that state and national exams, college admission tests, I know last year at my university, they had to suspend a lot of them because we were in the middle of the pandemic. Applications were due. They just simply could not require the SAT if you are in your home, boarded up. So we realized, and we've known that for years, this was nothing new to many educators, that you can't define a child's brilliance on a standardized assessment. So we know that now, even at the college level, we know those tests don't show everything about a child. It caused teachers to be creative with unconventional grading, which is another thing that researchers like myself have been saying. It gave us an awareness of accessibility with internet access, making sure things have closed captions, making sure that students with special needs also have access. So being remote caused us to think about some of our blinders when it comes to, does everyone have access to this thing that we thought was just normal, which was just internet? Does everyone have access to that? I think COVID caused so much so that businesses got involved, like AT&T, or like I said, Subway, or businesses just started to open their broadband networks so that people can have access to it. People outside of education, businesses outside of education, realized that, hey, we have to give people access to the internet. It's at this point, it's a fundamental need in society. Of course, kids will definitely be more digitally savvy. Some, I'm sure, don't like the online learning environment, but they for sure do have more experience with computers now. And then the last one is a bit morbid, but there have been less school shootings now that kids are virtual, which, and I put March 2020 here. In March 2020, that's right when the pandemic hit the US and people started to take it seriously. That was the first time that there was not a school shooting in March since 2002. So 18 years worth of school shootings. That was the first time there were no school shootings in March. So that is another shadow side benefit of students being remote. And hopefully, we don't want to stay remote, of course, but hopefully that causes us to think about these things in new ways so that when we open, we don't return to normal we return to something new and better. So where do we go from here? I put this picture here because right now this is where we are with education. We have teachers talking between glass dividers with masks on, I guess trying to lesson plan together. I'm not sure. So where do we go from here? Again, I want to reiterate, we're not trying to go back to what we were. We're trying to think of some new things. So where do we go? The biggest thing is recognizing the importance of community out of school time, in school time, health. Hopefully schools will increase their budgets for school nurses. I mean, just every single thing that COVID has impacted. We hope that schools realize that there is a connection between schools and communities, and it's inseparable. Churches play a role in this. I'll get to that in a second, but it's inseparable. So these are some just practical advice, and then I'm going to give some parent tips before I run out of time. Of course, yes, wear your mask, follow state guidelines, but there's some other things that you can do. If you're a community member, you're like, hey, I don't have kids, my kids are grown, sponsor a teacher's classroom. At this point, teachers need hand sanitizer, all of that. So sponsor a teacher's classroom that you know, send them an Amazon gift card every month, or just give them a shipment of masks and hand sanitizer. We know teachers are already being overworked, and we see this if you are following the news in Chicago, but some teachers are being put at a crossroads of deciding between their own health and safety and their own families, which is really sad. So if you want to be a responsible social citizen and you want to take something from this talk, sponsor a teacher's classroom if you know one. Maintain normal routines for children if you're a parent, and I'll get to some of those in a second. The next one is where I feel like churches, community groups, civic groups can really play a role. And I've joked with, I have some family friends who have large churches in Texas, and I joked with them about this, and I'm dead serious. I think Vacation Bible School in the coming summers should be reading and literacy camps, because our kids are falling behind. Like yes, we can read Bible stories, yes, but maybe they should be, maybe let's have some tutoring. Let's fill in the gaps where we know schools have not, and do some summer enrichment this summer. They chuckled, but they could not deny that was what we should be doing. Also, churches, especially if you have a large church, should become an internet hotspot, not where people can just come in, but maybe if it can reach the parking lot, where people can have access to internet. There's an article, and I probably should have linked it. A lot of this can be written off with taxes anyway. So if you can have if you have a church or a community group that is big enough, serving as an internet hotspot would be a great way to engage with the community this summer. Like I said, colleges should focus on student engagement. And then the last ones are important. I put right here, organizations, schools, as they prepare to reopen, should also be thinking about grief counseling and mediating kids who have been impacted with COVID in a very real way. So as we reopen, instead of returning to normal and assuming that everything's okay, acknowledging, even if they're little kids up to adults, if you are a corporate executive on this call, having this at your business, team building or professional development, giving space for grief counseling for those who have been impacted by COVID will be also important as things start to open. I'm gonna move on really quick. So I'm gonna zoom through this only because I do want to give nod to parents. So this is from the Department of Education's website in Nebraska. Many of you have probably already been on this. It has, if you have a child at home and you say, they're going to be at home with me for a while, or they're hybrid, they're going to school part-time, but I'm with them some of the time. How can I, someone who's not a teacher, help them? The Department of Education has a website where they give you, if they're grades 3 through 8, the standards, some sample tests, some questions, etc. And let me be honest, it's not that user-friendly, but it is a resource there. Okay. What is probably more helpful to me if you're a parent is on the Department of Education's website, they list the National PTA. The National PTA breaks down a lot of those standards. Now, it won't be state specific, so it won't be Nebraska standards, but the National PTA put helpful resources for every grade in parent-friendly language. And it looks like this. So you click on the website, you can click on each grade. And if you basically click on that, It looks like this, and it breaks it down in a family-friendly, parent-friendly way, so that if you're helping your child with their homework and you don't understand what a past participle is in language arts, you can read this and say, basically, my child, after they read a book, they need to be able to tell me for 4th grade, who are the characters in the book, what happened, what are the events. The next one says, how do you compare? Okay, they should be able to compare how this book, the book they just read, compares to the book they read last week. So it breaks it down in a very parent-friendly way, which I think is very important. And it was featured on the Department of Education's website for Nebraska. So you are following something that even they said is a resource. To me, it's just written in parent-friendly language. I'm trying to zoom through before we have time for questions. And it also looks like this. You can also print out PDFs if you want to make your own little binder at home. But it just helps you keep your child on track if that's something you're very concerned about. The next things are practical parent tips. Dr. Gooch Grayson, I'm gonna take like 2 minutes and then I'm gonna stop so we can.
You're okay.
Okay, I'm zooming through.
Take your time.
Really quick, so the remaining things are for parents. If you have a child at home, I know you're not a teacher, you're doing a great job. Here are some things that you can do. Maintain a daily schedule and post it, especially if they're kids 8th grade and younger. Posting the daily schedule, even if it's on poster board in the kitchen, is super helpful, because when they return to school, it will not be as casual as it is at home. So just posting, go to the Dollar Tree or Family Dollar, get a $1 poster board, put that on the back of the pantry so they know every day what happens. It's super important for kids. The younger they are, the more important. Brain breaks. Your attention span is only 3 to 5 minutes per your age. So you cannot expect kids, and this is why I think virtual learning, there's some gaps here. You can't expect kids to sit down for a 90-minute English lesson. You got to let them just get up, go, I don't know, jump rope. You could play your video game for 5 minutes, but you got to come back. I think brain breaks are more important than having them sit there unengaged. So if your child loves to play video games, okay, you sit here for 30 minutes. And then at the 30-minute mark, yes, you can play your video game for 5 minutes, but you have to come right back. It keeps kids engaged that way if there are things broken up. Let kids go outside. This is for as we get into warmer weather. Even if you're not a parent, letting them play outside is a wonderful way for them to be engaged. Even if you don't feel like they're learning, they actually are. Invest in books. If you're just like, just give me something I can do. If you buy books, diverse texts, research has shown through the Children's Defense Fund, which I have worked with, if you buy books, so if you just add a bunch of books in your Amazon cart, diverse books, books with different color characters, gendered characters, etc. Research has shown that 90% of children, just by reading them, either maintain or gain a reading level. So having just, hey, we're going to read for 30 minutes today is super important for kids. I'm going to skip through this, but down here, parents are stressed and 71% of them say online learning is stressing them out. So as parents, you have to guard your energy as well. I'm going to skip through some of these. And then really quick, your child, I've done this presentation in different ways with different people. If your child is at a school and they have special needs, they have to service them. So this is from the U.S. Department of Education. Dr. Gooch Grayson and the folks at MCC have this presentation. So ask them if you have any more questions, but they must ensure that your child gets the services they need. So I'm going to stop there. The one thing I'm going to say before we're done is your biggest takeaway for parents, especially, or people who are care providers for kids, is that, in my opinion, if we take everything I just said, it is more important for kids to still love school when this is over with than for them to be on grade level. I am less concerned with a child who just cannot understand fractions, or they're just really having trouble with multiplication. They can learn that, but what cannot be learned is the love of learning. And so if they're in this pandemic and we have virtual learning them to death and they just hate school or have a fear of school or cry when you mention the word school, that is much more damaging than a child being behind. Kids are going to be a bit behind, and we know that nationally, but just keeping the love of learning is the most important thing. So I'm going to stop and take questions.
So attendees, please send your questions to me in the chat. And I have one question for you, Dr. Vandiver. Excellent job,
Oh, thank you, thank you.
first of all. So the first question is, I have a child in high school who has had negative experiences with virtual learning. I'm very nervous about the college admissions process. How do you think the pandemic will shape college admissions? And
Yeah.
before you respond, I'm going to say, send them to MCC. That's a fast answer, but
Right.
go ahead.
Um, well, actually, a lot of your fears, other parents have that same fear. So I want to reassure you, you're not alone. But with COVID, as I mentioned kind of earlier in the presentation, COVID has caused us to realize that a lot of the SATs or even college essays, etc., have been tweaked a bit because kids are virtual. And so colleges, like I said, can't ask for the same things if we are virtual and we cannot get to these testing centers. So it's actually a bit, and I bragged about this last year, it's a bit advantageous for a lot of kids to start thinking about college if that's something they want to do, because the opportunities are a bit wider for them. I would definitely say consider community college for the first couple of years, absolutely. Secondly, look at schools who are waiving SAT and ACT requirements. And then the third thing is, oh, this is a helpful hint I've been giving some parents. For college essay questions, I was listening to an NPR um, broadcast, and they had the admissions counselor from Emory University on, I believe. Avoiding talking strictly about COVID is a way for your essay to kind of shine through, because a lot of their essays are going to be about COVID. So if you can make your standout aside from COVID, and have the recruiters and the admission counselors kind of think about your essay in a different way. He joked on the NPR call. He's like, every essay question has been about COVID. So yeah, that might be one way to get your application to rise to the top, is just be creative. Everyone's been shut down. How are you different as an applicant? So those are my tips for that parent.
Thank you for that
Yep.
response. So recently, I believe the Omaha Public Schools did return to 5-day this week.
Mm-hmm.
But is there a better learning option between the 3-2 plan and the 5-day virtual plan, considering safety, considering risk? What's your response to that?
So the 3-2 plan is hybrid. Hybrid learning can eat. So the answer is no. There's nothing academically better between virtual or going back and forth. I don't know if anyone's a doctor on this call, but I'm sure there are some health risks, of course, once you leave your house and you go somewhere. Just risk of exposure, of course, is up. The one thing about hybrid learning is that it could either be your best friend or your worst enemy. It's either going to be a success or an absolute train wreck. And kids are caught in the middle of that. Now, I want to also give nod. So it's easy for me to say, hybrid is always going to be risky. I do know some people on this call and parents who will listen to this later have to go to work. And so school is an actual form of childcare. So you have to do what's best for you and your house, but there's nothing academically better about sending them. No.
And can you expound on the community college and articulation, or that your experiences with that since your 25% reduction in enrollment?
Yeah, a lot of my students, I'm also an advisor, so I teach, but then I also have students I advise. I got a lot of emails last semester saying, hey, it just doesn't make financial sense, like I said, to spend $17,000, $20,000 at a university when all campus activities are closed. So I can get an equal, especially if they're freshmen and sophomores, an equal education somewhere else and then transfer back in. And so that makes financial sense to my family. And that's a decision that makes a lot of sense. I'm saying that as a person who has bills, that makes a lot of sense. And we hate to see them go, of course, from the university, but that is an excellent way for students who don't want to take the gap year or can't afford to. They're like, no, I want to still get this degree. Go somewhere that's a bit more affordable, and definitely considering what President Biden's plan is, it might be free. soon, that might be a great, affordable option to still keep your mind engaged while you wait for your university to open back up or you transfer out after your 2 years. So I think it's a great option for students, especially those who are not rich enough to take a gap year and just go travel Europe. Yes, that's a great option for a lot of students.
Thank you. How what advice do you have for parents who are also in school? We have a lot of single parents at Metropolitan Community College, and the balancing, or how do we advise them to balance their school, their children's school and education, and work?
Mm. I feel like if you answer this, you'll be a billionaire. I don't know. Um, I think this is one of the slides I skipped. You can't pour from an empty cup. So I think you take care of yourself first. It's kind of like the airplane thing. You put your mask on before you help everybody else. Make sure you're in a good headspace. Make sure your homework gets done. I say this as an educator, and people might turn up their nose. Kids, keep them engaged as you can, but you should also let them play. I think there is learning there too. I'm not saying just be on your video games all day. Take care of yourself, make sure your homework gets done. Keep your kids engaged as much as you can. You may not understand the answer to the math homework because it's more complicated now. I get that. But keep your kids engaged as long as you can. They only have 3 to 5 minutes attention span per year that they're alive. But if you can just keep them kind of bouncing between playing and learning, you have to do the best you can. But that would be my advice. The work-life balance, especially for parents who are in school themselves, is almost impossible. So I say take care of yourself first, then put on the safety mask for everybody else in your house.
Thank you. What advice would you give if one parent, I know who this is, who's asking this question, if one parent wants to send a student back and the other one does not for fear of the
Mm.
coronavirus?
I'm not going to get in anyone's marriage, so I can't answer that. But I read before this presentation, I read the 3-2 hybrid model. I read how it's divided by last names. I also read that if you don't like your schedule, you can switch last names, which I thought was interesting. Okay. And I did see you can switch the plan. So like if you're hybrid and you're like, this is not for me, I can go back virtual, and vice versa. Not every state does that. There are some states you're locked in for the semester. So if you say hybrid, that is what you will be this entire semester. So I would say lean into Nebraska's flexibility. Maybe try for, I don't know, 1 week, see what hybrid is like, take a temperature check every day. And if there's any symptoms or anything, just, pull it out. I don't know. I would say because Nebraska gives you flexibility, there might be a way to appease both parents on a trial basis. Maybe try hybrid and see, and then bring them right back when you're uncomfortable. I don't know about these new strains of the virus. I'm not a public health person, but I do expect that waves are not over, even with the vaccine. That's just me with common sense. So I would say maybe take advantage of the flexibility now, because I can see Nebraska doing what other states are doing. Once you decide your learning model for this semester or this quarter, you will be locked in. So you're not going to have flexibility forever, I don't think. Not when there are new strains and people are still understanding the virus.
What considerations are being given to students who do thrive in this environment for future learning?
People have been asking school districts to expand that. So just like most large city or mid-sized city school districts have alternative learning centers, pregnancy centers, etc., a lot of researchers have been saying, hey, some students are thriving. They actually don't ever need to see a teacher face to face. They're having a great time at home. To have online learning centers, or a couple of them across the city, so that students can get the social engagement, maybe by going to an actual place, but being completely virtual. So that's something that people have been asking. If we open, since we're not trying to return to normal, we're trying to do things better, that might be something that is very useful for kids who don't need the social interaction. They do really good independently. And yeah.
And we have time for two more questions. One just popped in. Do you have a vision of, let's say hypothetically, you've just been
Mm.
named the Secretary of Education.
Wow.
What is your vision of what you would like education to look like when we reach a new normal, taking advantage of the prior and current systems of education?
My focus is a lot on like multiculturalism. So I care a lot about like, so when I talked about the 1619 project,
Mhm.
I care a lot about that. I think what we saw on January 6th came from, yes, a lot of propaganda and misinformation, but it also came from people not acknowledging that we live in a very diverse world. People are going to be different from you. People are going to have different views from you. You're not always going to get your way. And we live in a United States that is very diverse. So in my perfect world, I would see teachers being required to lean into very kind of critical multicultural education, because what we don't want is for kids to see, and that's what I'm nervous about. They see what happens on January 6th and they think that's normal, that when you don't get your way, you do this just because someone's different. They think different, they look different, they practice a different religion. So I would probably make a lot of people mad as Secretary of Education, and I would require social studies and those types of subjects to be longer and a lot more critical about our nation's history, the honesty of the history, and the importance of diversity. So yeah, it'd be diversity training for everybody from K through adult.
The civil with the social justice twist, right?
Correct, absolutely correct.
Last question. Do you see colleges and universities offering online education training courses as a result of forced virtual learning? And maybe your institution does that in your teacher training.
For students or for faculty?
Um, I believe they mean, I'm not certain.
For students, so there's like a, we call it facet, but it's an acronym for something. I think it's like facilitating,
For
excel,
faculty.
some
They
for
just,
faculty. Um, I think they're going to have to, because one thing, and I didn't want to talk about it because it impacts my job. I think higher ed, so colleges and universities, are going to be permanently changed by this. In that, yes, schools might open, but I think I will always probably be required to teach something online, because you can pack a, when I'm face to face, I have 20 kids in a classroom. Virtual, I could teach 100 at a time and it's no problem. So I do think it's a better business model for them. I will, to your point, whoever asked the question, yes, I think it's going to be a required training for faculty to better learn how to teach online, because even when things open, we will probably have to teach something still online, because it's a way to still get students. I teach in Maryland, I can have a student in Alaska taking my course. So I think universities are going to change, and they're going to have to teach people how to teach it for sure. These are
excellent.
good questions. Thank you.
That the last two I have to share was from Karen Edwards and Dr. Maria Vasquez, who is our Vice President for Student Affairs.
Got it. Got it.
So thank you, Dr. Vandiver, for coming back to Metropolitan Community College. I feel like we need to give you an honorary something, because this is like the
I
fourth
hope to
time.
be back. I hope to be back. I have so much fun going. I get to see high school friends, and I get to eat. I miss Village Inn. I love Village Inn.
A lot of the
Godfather's
moves,
Pizza and
moves.
Runza. And then my husband, Time Out, of course.
Time out, time
So
out.
yes, I miss that. So I hope to be back soon once things are safer.
Absolutely, we would be happy to host you. Um, we are so delighted that you accepted our invitation to present and to talk about the implications of this multiple pandemics, particularly immediately following the presidential inauguration. So that was very much appreciated. Your educational expertise and foresight has helped us prepare for our roles to execute or request features in education at all levels, pre-K all the way through post-secondary, that will contribute to fully prosper our communities. And a final thank you to Minister Ananias Montague for sharing his musical inspiration, and again to you, our audience, for making it a priority to explore Black history in 2021. Please do not forget to complete the online evaluation at mcceneb.edu/IIEEVAL. And we look forward to seeing you at the next virtual Black History Month program on Thursday, February 4th at 2:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Lessons on leadership from Legends will be presented by Cynthia Butler McIntyre, who in retirement serves as an educational advocate and activist. We hope to see you next time. Continue to be safe, and thank you again.